Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I'll be showing you guys the best Strand Hunter build in the entire game. With this build, you can infinitely suspend enemies, effectively just putting the game on easy mode. Simply just because Suspend is just so unbelievably busted. There's almost never a moment where we can't suspend an enemy, thanks to not only having infinite dodges, but infinite grenades as well, which feeds perfectly into the build, not only for mobility, but also just for killing enemies, spawning orbs, never having to reload, and further reducing all of our other cooldowns. Not to mention, Strand Hunter has one of the best supers in the entire game, and on top of that has fantastic survivability with permanent uptime on Woven Mail, which reduces damage taken by a whopping 60%. Initially I thought that Strand was pretty weak, but after setting this build up and playing with it for a while, it's one of my favorite Hunter builds to use just because of how strong Suspend really is, and how much fun it is to have near infinite grapple grenades. Before I get into the build, here's a quick word from our sponsor that helps me to continue to create content for a living. I'm sure we've all heard of Raid Shadow Legends by this point, but did you know that Raid actually has over 80 million players worldwide, and can be played for free on both mobile and PC? Waiting for the bus, commuting to work, or just waiting for the servers to come back online? Raid Shadow Legends is the perfect way to turn that downtime into gaming uptime, with stunning graphics and over 650 unique customizable champions. Take on epic boss fights, clear massive dungeons for epic rewards, and even fight real players for the ultimate RPG experience in Raid. Personally, my favorite part about Raid is the massive amount of team combinations that you can put together to take on all kinds of encounters that the game has to offer. Collecting and leveling up champions is a ton of fun, and using ones that synergize very well with each other to kind of create like team builds is a very rewarding and super satisfying experience. Up until March 14th, Raid has a special Valentine's Day themed adventure with the Raid Love Quest, where you can play some Valentine's themed minigames for a chance to win Valentine's Day themed Raid champions, and even up to $1,000 in Amazon gift cards. If you're interested, all you need to do is download Raid via the link in the description, and then head to raidlovequest.plarium.com. Once you're there, you can enter your player ID and start participating. And if you're an existing player, you can enter the promo code STValentine23, and you can get some Valentine goodies. Make sure to download by using my link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen, and new players will get a free starter pack with some awesome in-game loot. Big thanks to Raid for sponsoring today's video. The core of this build revolves around our two aspects, the first being Widow Silk, which simply just gives us 2 grenade charges, but it also enables our grapple grenades to create a grapple point. If you grapple to a grapple point, it fully refunds all grenade energy, so technically you can grapple infinitely under the right circumstances. This has some very niche use cases, such as being able to infinitely pretty much just spam the grapple melee for kills on like these guys in the air, which is kind of a lot of fun, or alternatively using this to cheese boss damage phases so you never have to reload, which we'll talk more about later. The next aspect is Ensnaring Slam, where if we simply press our air move while in the air, it will consume our dodge cooldown and slam us on the ground, suspending all enemies around us. However, performing this air move increases the cooldown of our dodge. While at 100 mobility, the cooldown on a marksman dodge is 18 seconds, while Ensnaring Slam is 22 seconds, which makes Ensnaring Slam a 20% longer cooldown, give or take. This is the centerpiece of the build, as it is our only application of Suspend. So our ultimate goal is to have our dodge cooldown as low as humanly possible, so we can suspend enemies 24/7. In terms of our other abilities, we're going to be using the Tangle Grenade. The main reason for this is that the cooldown is really low, and it enables us to combo the mobility with the grapple, so you can more quickly and more safely suspend enemies. It also just looks really cool and is a lot of fun to execute. Additionally, meleeing immediately after grappling does a pretty good amount of damage as well. It's a lot of fun, but it's also going to spawn multiple orbs of power, which we'll touch on later in the mod section. Alternatively, the Shackle Grenade is certainly good, however the cooldown is just way longer than the Grapple Grenade, and in my opinion it doesn't synergize as well with the build, especially because our orb generation is incredibly limited for as long as the Reaper mod is disabled. Once the Reaper mod is enabled again, the Shackle Grenade will be infinitely more viable. Just keep in mind that you do end up losing a lot of mobility, and you can't combo the Grapple Grenade with the air dodge. Initially, I wanted the build to be able to infinitely spam the melee as well, but unfortunately the melee just does such little damage that it's kind of a complete waste to try to build into it at all, which is very unfortunate because it's a lot of fun to use. When it comes to the fragments, these are what really end up taking the build to the next level. Threat of Mind will refund class ability energy, i.e. our dodge, anytime that we kill an enemy that is suspended. How much energy you get entirely depends on how many enemies you kill, build and which type of enemy they are. But generally you get roughly like 15 to 20% of your dodge back per kill, which is very strong. This fragment alone enables you to have near infinite dodges if you get enough kills on suspended targets. Next we have Thread of Continuity, which increases the duration of our suspend, raising it from a base duration of 8 seconds all the way up to 12 seconds, which makes it to where you can literally infinitely suspend champions if you feel like it, which is kinda crazy, and it's very fun just turning enemies into target dummies. Next we have Thread of Warding, which gives us Woven Mail for 10 seconds anytime that we pick up an Orb of Power. This, in my opinion, is absolutely mandatory because Woven Mail is just so unbelievably strong, giving us 60% damage reduction, and using this build will be very difficult without this damage reduction because you need to get close range in order to actually suspend enemies. Lastly, we have Thread of Generation, which is what enables us to have near infinite grenades. By doing damage with our weapons, we can get our grenade back in just a few seconds, which is insanely busted. These are the 4 main fragments that I recommend for pretty much all forms of content. There is one honorable mention, however, being the Thread of Ascent. This makes it to where activating your grenade fully reloads your equipped weapon and increases your handling speed, which also increases how quickly you can reload. This is incredibly strong for boss DPS phases, as with your aspect, you can simply create a grapple point on the floor that you can just infinitely grapple to over and over, allowing you to reload literally for free. If you plan on using this fragment instead, I'd highly recommend dropping Thread of Continuity, since all the other fragments are rather mandatory. Now that we understand the core functionality of the build, it's time to optimize it with our gear. When it comes to exotics, I opted for the 6 Coyote, which gives us a second dodge charge, just so I can reliably dodge back to back if anything bad were to happen. It just makes it much easier to combo with the build and always have a dodge ready to go, and I think it's a no-brainer for this setup. Another option I could see being good is Frosties. I just don't think it synergizes as well as having 2 dodge charges, but it is a good option. When it comes to which stats you want to prioritize, I'd recommend going for 100 mobility first to further reduce the cooldown on your dodge, 100 resilience for that damage reduction, although it's not nearly as mandatory because you have Woven Mail up all the time, but it is still strong. And lastly, getting 100 discipline for your grenade cooldown. My hunter has horribly optimized gear, so please don't scrutinize my stats. But if you're just like me, keep in mind that the new font mods actually provide 30 stat while you have an armor charge up. So all you need to do is just get 70 on a certain stat, then use a font mod of whatever that stat is, and you effectively have 100 in that stat all the time, making it much easier to set this build up. Now let's get into the mods. I'll have a link to the loadout in the description below. I'd highly recommend watching the whole mod section though, because there's definitely some things that you want to swap out depending on your individual circumstance. And currently one of the bread and butter mods for this build is actually disabled. So this build is significantly better once that mod gets re-enabled, which unfortunately I can't put on my gear right now because it's disabled, so it won't be in the loadout link. The mod that I'm referring to is Reaper, where anytime you use your class ability, your next weapon final blow spawns an Orb of Power. Our class ability is of course our air move dodge, so being able to dodge and then kill any suspended enemy and spawn an Orb of Power immediately is absolutely a must-have for this build, simply because getting an Orb of Power is not only going to allow us to use any sort of font mods, it's also going to enable the use of weapon surge mods, which are very strong, and we're going to be using void weapons with this build to take advantage of volatile flow, which is one of the best mods in the game. Pair this with Void Weapon just being so broken, and being able to get infinite heavy with bricks from beyond. Hitting Orbs of Power is insanely important. Because Reaper isn't in the game, we are using 3 methods actually of getting Orbs of Power, which are heavy-handed and firepower. The reason that we're using heavy-handed is because the grapple melee actually counts as a melee, so anytime that we get a kill, that's going to create an Orb of Power when we actually get the killing blow with the grapple melee. And if you hit the target with the grapple and then melee, it also counts as a grenade final blow, so we can effectively get 2 armor charges or 2 orbs every single time that we get a kill with our grapple melee, which is a fantastic way to spawn orbs while we don't have the Reaper mod available. Our third way of spawning orbs is via a siphon mod on our helmet for whichever weapon type you prefer to use. Now I'm just going to go over every piece and which mods I think that you should use and some alternative options. Starting off with the helmet, already mentioned the siphon mod of course. Heavy ammo finder is an extremely good mod here, just increasing the chance of heavy ammo to drop, and then heavy ammo scout when playing in a group enables all that heavy ammo that you're spawning to also spawn for your teammates. However, if you're playing solo, you could go double ammo heavy finder or put on a special ammo finder as well. You could even double up on the siphon mods to get a little bit extra orb generation, but I don't think it's entirely necessary. For the gloves, I mentioned the 2 best mods, although once we gain access to the Reaper mod, I don't think firepower is nearly as mandatory. You could end up swapping this out for Font of Focus if you have lower than 100 discipline, so that you get the extra 30 discipline again when you have an armor charge up. Lastly, I have Focusing Strike, which gives a ton of class ability energy anytime that we cause damage with a melee attack, which we're constantly doing with our grapple melee. This gives roughly about 20% of our dodge cooldown back every time that we melee, which is certainly pretty strong. But if you notice that you're getting your dodge back enough because you have 100 mobility, you could put on a loader mod to just increase your reload speed. On our chest, we just want to go for damage resistance that matches whichever activity we were doing. I was just doing the Nightfall with solar damage burn, so I put on solar resist and sniper, but depending on what you're doing, you may want to swap this around. And then for the third mod, I went for Font of Endurance because I don't have 100 resilience with my build, but if you do have 100 resilience, you could easily swap it to another damage reduction such as Concussive Dampener or something, or you could consider a reserve mod in the third slot so you can spam your heavy even more. For the boots, I would generally recommend having 2 weapon surges of whichever the weapon type that you are mainly using. For me, it is Void. This will enable us to gain a 17% damage reduction for our Void weapons, which is incredibly strong. But I unfortunately have very bad mobility stats, so getting Font of Agility is really good just to further reduce the cooldown of my dodge. If I had better gear, I would be getting 100 mobility, and therefore I wouldn't have to use this. The third mod, we have Better Already, which basically just gives us a whole bunch of healing anytime that we pick up an Orb of Power, which this build is certainly lacking in healing, so I think that this is an amazing mod to use. If you find that you prefer Recuperation, feel free to use Recuperation instead. Alternatively, if you feel like you don't need the survivability, just slap on another Surge mod. And lastly, for the Cloak, I highly recommend 1 Bomber, so that anytime that we use our dodge, it's going to reduce our grenade cooldown, which fits in perfectly with the build. And then I have Font of Restoration. The main reason for this is just because I can't put Reaper on, and I didn't want to put something on that would affect the build and make it seem like I'm getting more energy than I should if I were to have like 2 bombers on or something. But until Reaper's active, you could definitely put on 2 copies of Bomber to even further reduce the cooldown. And then I have Time Dilation just so Armor Charge lasts for an extra 5 seconds. So anytime I'm able to not get an orb, I'm still going to gain that cooldown reduction for an extra 5 seconds than I would by default. When it comes to the weapons, feel free to use whatever you like. I really like using Double Special right now with a machine gun, particularly a Retrofit Escapade with 4 times a Charm Target Lock. We're essentially able to get infinite heavy ammo via the new ammo mods with Brick from Beyond, and using Double Special even further compounds the amount of heavy ammo that we're able to spawn. So most of the time I'm just running around with my machine gun, gunning everything down. But anytime that I'm not doing that, it's really nice to be able to blind enemies from a far away distance so that I can then grapple in safely, suspend them, and then start my chain of orb spawning and killing. Wave Splitter I really like because Trace Rifles just do a ton of damage. It is a Void one, so it's going to benefit from volatile rounds, but also anytime I pick up an Orb of Power, it's going to fully reload the gun, and it's going to make it do suppressing damage for the next 15 seconds, which means that I have all 3 forms of champions covered. I have Barrier in the form of volatile weapon rounds, I have Unstoppable in the form of Suspend, and I have Overload in the form of Suppression, so no matter which champion there is, I'll be able to take care of it. There's a ton of different weapon options. I think using Deafening Whisper, if with a really good roll, particularly one with Unrelenting for more survivability, is certainly good. If you wanted to not use an exotic here and use like a Funnel Web, pairing that with something like an Izanagi or an Arbalest for some boss damage is really good if you're going to be using the Retrofit for a lot of mob clearing. Lately, I've really been enjoying my Corrective Measure with Demolitionist to further reduce the cooldown on my grenade. There's a ton of options, but honestly, any Void weapon is going to be your bread and butter because volatile rounds is just so strong. But if you want to use Strand weapons with all of the Strand weapon mods, definitely feel free to do that. When it comes to how you actually want to play this build, one tip that I have is you want to make sure that you actually hit your target with your grapple grenade if you intend on flying over to them, because this will then cause them to be unraveled, which when you kill them, the unraveled projectiles will travel to another enemy and then just do a little bit of extra damage. But generally I'd recommend opening up with the grapple grenade to then get into melee range. If you want to spawn an orb, you can either immediately melee with your grapple grenade, or you can just suspend the targets to then kill them and spawn an orb via Reaper. After that, you'll have all your armor charges up, you'll have Woven Mail, and you'll have volatile rounds and all the weapon damage buffs that you need. So from that point, you can basically just go from gunning down enemies to chaining your grenade melees into more dodges, and then dodges into more grenade melees, suspending enemies whenever you want, using your grenade melee to either run away, engage, kill stuff, or just fly around in circles like an idiot. The build is pretty straightforward to use. I'd say the main downside that it has is that you need to be in close range, which is why having a blinding grenade launcher is so strong, because you can blind them and then go into close range to further suspend them. This build is definitely on the riskier playstyle of things, but I think once you master it, it ends up being a ton of fun and is a very valuable addition to any fire team because you're just suspending enemies permanently and making them not do anything, which is incredibly good, especially for very tanky and very lethal enemies. That's going to be it for today's video. If you enjoyed, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe for videos similar to this one. I plan on uploading a video on my Void Hunter build pretty soon as well, so feel free to stick around for that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.